My name is Ruby. I am a child of a single-parent family, who was short and poor. My mother tried her best to send me to an expensive school, where I met a special boy. And my life changed dramatically as a result. My father died early and my mother had to work 2 jobs to support me and my sister, Mira, who was 10 years older than me, and she was the prettiest girl in the village. Whenever we walked down the street, the boys were only attracted to her, and I was so short that the boys only saw me as air next to my sister. But my sister never underestimated me, and she once told me that we didn't need a man in our future, and that we could be happy even if it was just the 2 of us. This encouraged me. But she finally broke her promise. She married a man and went to the big city, and I had to rely on letters to send my thoughts to my sister. By the time I started high school, my mom was ready to send me to a fancy school outside my village. Although I was reluctant, my mother believed I could accept everything there. A few days later, while I was busy writing, I suddenly saw a boy riding out of the window stealing apples from our tree. I immediately went over to him and confronted him about why he was stealing, while he smugly said that his family was the richest in the whole village and that this was no problem for him. This was the first encounter between the 2 of us. At my new school, I began to be bullied and isolated by the other students because I was short and poor, while the boy came to me of his own accord, and I learned his name was Julius. We started having lunch together and became very good friends. I knew I was the ugly duckling and he was the white swan that I could not compete with. But when his lips touched my cheek, I felt like I was dreaming. Yet the relationship was stopped by Julius' parents, who even had to take Julius to the city for this reason. When we parted, he promised that he would write to me regularly, but I waited for months and still did not hear back. He also broke his promise. Betrayed by my beloved, I felt as if my life had plunged into the abyss. But just then, my sister Mira came back. She took me to her new home. My sister encouraged me and wanted me to get back to writing to tell my story to more people, and she began to teach me how to write. So I put all these unpleasant things behind me. By the time I graduated, I had finished a novel, and it was published raw. With this debut novel, I was able to support myself. I rented a small apartment in the city, took care of my mother, and everything was moving in a good direction. At one of my book signings, I was smiling and signing books for the fans in front of me. Suddenly a familiar voice pulled my mind back to my student days, and I looked up to see those familiar eyes, and a burst of anger ignited in my heart. Why was Julius here? He had disappeared for so long. Why did he appear at this time? I cried and punched him in the chest, and he explained that it was because his parents had jammed the letters he had sent, but he had been able to receive the letters I had written. We both caught up on how much we missed each other. He kissed me and we held each other tightly for a long time. We ended up getting married and it was the happiest day of my life. From losing my sister and Julius to reconciling with them, I also went from being childish to mature. Looking at Julius standing on the balcony smiling at me, I went up to him and took his hands. Everything was arranged for the best. My name is Alice and I am the daughter of a detective. I have been trying to become a detective like my father since I was a child. Until today, I arrested a robber in a convenience store perfectly. I thought this was the beginning of my detective career. But I never thought I would fall in love with the smuggler's son. It happened after the arrest of the robber. Detective James approached me and wanted my help in finding evidence that the suspect Joseph was smuggling gold. Because he was my favorite detective, although he treated me just as his sister, I had no reason to refuse him. To get close to Joseph, I became a bodyguard for his son, John. His son was rumored to be a reckless, spoiled high school student. But when I met John for the first time, I was dumbfounded. It was no exaggeration to say that he was the most handsome man I had ever seen. But the opposite of his angelic looks was his flirtatious personality. Because of his impolite flirting, I knocked him out. Although I stated that I was just conditioned, he was still so angry that he wanted to fire me. As a bodyguard, I needed to follow John. It was also my job to catch him sharply when he was just about to fall down, but I nearly fell into his pretty pupils. Fortunately, his girlfriend Vanessa broke the weird atmosphere. John told me he didn't actually love Vanessa, but what did that have to do with me? I concentrated on finding evidence of Joseph's smuggling, but the omnipresent John left me with no way to get started. John was a nuisance, childish and irrational. But when I was being molested, he would stand up for me, even he knew that he was no match, and instead I had to clean up the mess. Instead of feeling terrible or rude, John found me even more attractive. I almost got carried away by his praise. My heart beat faster and my whole body became strange. I told myself I had to finish quickly. The opportunity was soon approaching. Joseph was away on business. I started looking for the gold while everyone was asleep, but I was accidentally discovered by John. I didn't know how to explain, and to distract him I grabbed his head and kissed him. The worst part was that I enjoyed it. He confessed to me after the chaotic night, and I was annoyed and anxious because John was so clingy. Since confirmed the relationship, he even grabbed my hands while eating, watched me from morning to night, even cooked for me, fed me, and kissed me. He told me his biggest dream was to become a chef and have his own restaurant, but his father wouldn't allow him to do that. Although I found it was kind of sweet, I even started to feel sorry for him when I thought about his dad being a criminal. But I had to get it done, and I told John that nothing would feel better than achieving his dream, so stop being a loser and be bold. Finally I found the opportunity to get into Joseph's bathroom and found the gold and have Joseph brought to justice, but I wasn't happy about it. I saw John come up to me, coldly congratulated me on the success of the mission and left. All I could think about was John. When Officer James, whom I once liked, confessed his love for me, I actually didn't have an ounce of joy. I turned him down. 2 years went by and I never saw John again. Until I went to a new restaurant one day and saw a familiar back in the kitchen. Only then did I realize that John left me to become a chef solely because I told him at that time to be himself, to do what he really wanted to do, and not to follow his dad's path. As for the reason he left me, it wasn't because I sent his dad to prison, but because he thought I was pretending to love him. Actually, no, I wasn't pretending. I walked up to him, kissed him, and walked with him into a future that belonged to us. Hi, I'm Hannah, a teenage actress. I was doing a kissing scene with the most popular teenage actor, Steve. And just when I thought I had a chance to finally be famous, the director called me out at the last minute of the kiss. I was pushed by Steve and landed on my butt, after which he went back to his nanny van to disinfect himself as if I had some kind of disease. Somehow, the news spread quickly and even reached my school, where it was learned by my nemesis Laura and became another reason for her to harass me. Because Laura is also a famous actress, she and Steve just harvested an excellent film of $3 billion box office. I was furious. Why didn't you wait until my movie came out to say that? Then I pushed her away and ran back to my car and left the school. As soon as I got home I told my sister Daisy about my problems with Steve and she told me straight away after learning everything. Why not try to make Steve fall in love with me? She was right, because I could get any boy I wanted, and Steve was no exception. I have a very handsome manservant Griffin, but I always feel that he is plotting against me. So I always make things difficult for him, such as eating fries without potatoes and separating the trio of coffee. Although he was like a volcano which was ready to erupt, I was happy with it. We ran into Laura when we went to the mall that day, and seeing how sneaky she was, Griffin and I followed her. She stopped in front of a club, and suddenly Steve came out of it, and Laura immediately rushed toward him and took his hands. Griffin and I hid behind a large pile of boxes and peeked at them. Could they have been related before? But soon I saw Steve pushing Laura away, and now I knew Steve didn't like Laura. Just as I was trying to get the picture, I fell into Griffin's arms. Looking into his beautiful eyes, my world stopped. At his reminder I rushed to get up, only to find that Steve and Laura had disappeared. The next day, I went to Laura and Steve's set and pretended to fall down while he was filming so he would catch me. But to my surprise, another man caught me. It was Griffin, who had come to bring me lunch. At this point Steve turned to us and he looked a little angry and questioned me who this man was. Wait a minute, did he be jealous? At this point Griffin interjected that he was my manservant and told Steve not to worry, saying that I belonged to him. Since then Steve had treated me differently, talking to me more and giving me a lot of guidance on my acting skills. The next day, I was at school preparing for the scene about Steve, when Laura suddenly started talking loudly on the phone, all intimate words with Steve. Her servants were fawning like hyenas, but I knew it was all self-directed on her part. So this day when Steve invited me to dinner, I suddenly closed my eyes, puckered my lips and leaned in. Because I knew there would be a lot of reporters in the restaurant and I could use them to properly publicize the act. But what I didn't expect was that he deliberately stepped to the side and my forehead hit the lamp post behind him. I looked stupid when the reporters attacked me with their cameras. Steve hurriedly pulled me into his car and he apologized, saying that he actually really liked me, provided he was heterosexual. It turned out that Steve's change towards me all this period was not because of me, but because he had fallen in love with my servant on that set and wanted me to pair them up. After the surprise, I quickly calmed down. I said yes and made him promise me one condition. The next day, Steve came to our school without any notice. The girls were excited, especially Laura, but it turned out to be a hard hit by Steve, because he announced in front of the whole school that I was his girlfriend and expressed his love to me. Laura saw this and instantly fainted. But when I came home, I found that my joy had been taken away as well. Griffin quit without saying anything to me. I tried to call him, but he didn't answer my calls. I used to see him all the time, but now I couldn't find him. Oh, how ironic, I found that I seemed to have fallen in love with him. With Steve's help, our movie was very successful and I became a great teenage actress, but I really missed Griffin inside. So I posted my thoughts about him online. To that person, I just want to say, you know who you are, and I really miss you. Wherever you are, please come to visit me tonight and I'll be waiting for you at my favorite park. I was nervous that night as I waited for him in the park, but even after a few hours there was no sign of him. I was almost giving up when suddenly I saw him coming in the distance and it turned out he thought I liked Steve and opted out. At last I had a kissing scene in the night light and it was really wonderful.